That was easy.
Do you want to just like, okay, we're recording. All right, great. Well, Will, good to have you back.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Yeah, and obviously you've had some changes since the last time. You know, bunch of things happened. So give us a little bit of an update. What you've been doing and what you're working on.
Well, yeah, since gosh, I can't remember. It's been a couple of years now. But no, I mean, right now I'm working on Zaprite, which is a Bitcoin payments company. We help businesses accept Bitcoin myriad of ways. I know you know the deal on that, but Zaprite is non-custodial. We are essentially bring your own wallet, whatever custody arrangement you're used to and comfortable with. We let you bring that to the Zaprite world, and then if you're doing business invoicing or you have a product to sell or you have a WooCommerce store, something like that, you can accept Bitcoin. Okay,
great. And so that's great. You've obviously been doing a lot with that, especially based on sort of some of the conversation that we had, I think, 2 times ago when we were here. Yeah. We talked about product management and all that. And I've noticed, like, in the last year or so, you've written a lot on the art of product management. So can you tell us a little bit more about what that series is about and what you're trying to, who your audience is and what you're trying to help them with?
Sure. Yeah, I'm writing a series of essays, almost done. I have one more to write. It'll be done before this podcast series is done. But it's called The Invariance of Product Development or Software Development. And the audience for this is really anyone who's mostly people that are directly involved. So that's the engineers, product managers, designers who are actually building the software. But I also think there's a benefit for the people that are sort of tangentially involved, the people that are inputs into that system. So salespeople, marketers, people in ops, but anyone who's like really touching the whole process of how do we get our strategy set, ideas set, execution of writing the code, and then ultimately the delivery of that. And the sort of take I have on that I think is somewhat unique is I call them invariants for a reason, is that the way I've systematized this over time from Stack Overflow to Unchained now to Zaprite is thinking of things not in terms of like methodologies like waterfall or agile or scrum or something like that, and really trying to go an abstraction layer above that and say, are there some bullet points? Are there a few things that I can do consistently every time when I'm building software, regardless of what type of methodology I'm following, that if I do these things, I'm more likely to be successful or more likely to be consistent? And so I came up with 5 things, which I call the atomic units of software development. And then I built these invariants on top of them saying, these things you just have to do no matter what methodology you're using, no matter how big your teams are, you just have to do these things. And if you do them, you'll be more consistent.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously a lot of this, we sort of covered a little bit in that episode. And and at least for me, the product management part of basically doing anything, right? Like creating the product or having sort of clean edges around the product, knowing what you're going to build and what you're bringing to the market is at the heart of starting businesses, right? Sure. It's at the heart of the value that you're providing. And that process is not so simple. And one of the things that I want to do with this podcast and all the people that are watching and listening, is give them some tools, right? Yeah. To understand how you take an idea and productize it. Because for me, that's sort of like kind of intimidating, right? I'm a coder, I can make things, but the actual process from going from an idea to something that the market can consume or use or whatever is that's always been sort of like a little I don't know, black box-ish for me, and hopefully you can shed some light on it.
Yeah, there's a meme going around on Twitter right now, which is it's the red button decision meme, where it's like pay $14 for no reason, to renew my domain or admit that my dream is over, right? And there's also kind of a trope in it kind of comes from Silicon Valley, right? Is that, ideas are cheap and that execution is everything. There's truth to that, but I don't think ideas are cheap. In fact, one of the arguments I make in the invariance is that in this world of software development that we have, where Silicon Valley is very dominant in terms of, but not just the products that come out, but like the people who work in this industry, they go through there a lot, right? But this idea that ideas are cheap, I actually find the opposite a lot of times, is that these software businesses are full of people that can execute, but they have very weak management or weak people who are supposed to be in charge of the ideas of like setting strategy and vision for companies, right? And that you have all this talent of people that can execute and so little vision and so little strategy or so little process. I don't mean process in terms of step 1, step 2, step 3. I mean process in terms of just like who is supposed to be saying what we're supposed to build at any point, and how are they held accountable to whatever process they're using to do that. And in the invariance, that's really where we begin. That's invariant number 1, which I call think and then do, which is I see this a lot, is that a lot of people just start writing code. Not a very good idea if you want to bring a product to market. You might get lucky, but it's going to take luck.
Okay, yeah. So what I want to do with this series is basically develop an idea.
Okay.
Okay. We did talk briefly about this, but Will claims he can't remember the actual idea that I proposed. So what we're going to do is sort of like instead of talking about the article, we're going to actually do the article, right? We're going to do some thinking around the idea and put some clean edges on what makes sense and how to do it and so on. So here is the Bitcoin business idea that we're going to talk about, hopefully in this series for a while. And depending on how it goes and so on, we'll see how. But this is to hopefully inspire people. Yeah, we're going to try to make something, and we're going to go one step at a time according to the invariance and so on. So here is the idea, and it's an idea that I've had for a while. I want software that is basically like a bank, a Bitcoin bank for my friends and family. Okay. So I'm pretty good at securing coins, and they trust me. They're not as good at self-custodying and things like that, or they're very uncomfortable doing it, and they're afraid they're going to lose all their money. So they would rather trust me, and I want to have some sort of software that does that. Now, I don't know the business model around it. I don't know, but I do believe that there's a market for something like this. So that's about all I'm gonna give you.
That's pretty good.
Okay. Now let's go through some of this process.
Let's go through it a little bit. So let's just so a refresher for everyone. I have those atomic units, which is strategy, discovery, building, quality assurance, and then delivery, which then sort of go to certain invariants. And that first invariant is think then do. It aligns with the strategy atomic unit. And so when setting strategy, before we jump into solving this, I know you're eager to solve this problem. I want to say the reason we have it like that is that the idea in building software for me comes very naturally to engineers and not naturally to, say, product managers or designers, people who haven't written code, is that the goal is to solve problems at higher levels of abstraction before you solve problems at lower levels of abstraction. So our goal in this episode here is to set the strategy for your Bitcoin family app, right? And so we're dealing with the highest levels of abstraction. And my first tip in building a good strategy is to really focus on what things accomplish, not what they do and how they work at this layer of abstraction. We're going to do it. We're going to discover it. We're going to spec it. We're going to write code. We're going to do those things. But right now, we're really focused on what this thing accomplishes, not necessarily the inner workings of how it does it, right? Okay. Because the strategy, we could invalidate it and say, well, we can't build it. But what's the point of doing that, right? We got to dream a little bit here. We have to be ambitious and think about what we can do. So I'm going to ask you a few questions about your.
Okay, yeah. Before we go on, though, like I just want to emphasize how important that point that you made is. That it's not about, you know, cool tools you want to use or anything like that. There's a level of abstraction where it's really at that, you know, consumer mentality almost. Like you're delivering, you know, very definable value to somebody that is out there in the world, and that is the level of conversation that you need to have first before you talk about anything about the tech stack or even, you know, like what you're going to actually build and so on, because you might come up with something different on that point. So
you don't want to constrain yourself unnecessarily, right? Is it like, I like working with engineers a lot of times. There's this particular type of engineer where you'll talk to them and be like, I know we can't build this, but and they're like, hold on. How do you know what I can build or what I can't build? Why don't you just tell me what you want, and then we can discuss what we can build or not, right? So starting at that highest level of abstraction, this, you know, what do things accomplish, you know? Not how do they work and what do they do exactly? You know, we have all this time to figure that out. You have this idea, right? You have, you know, you have your family, you want them to have Bitcoin, they want to have Bitcoin, but they don't necessarily want to go through the rigors of self-custody the way, say, me and you do, right? But you're unwilling to just send them to Coinbase, right? Would that be an accurate description?
I don't want them to depend on Coinbase because I don't think that's generally good for the ecosystem or for them. But I'm not comfortable with them self-custodying yet either.
Sure.
So something in between where I can be that bridge to help them get there. Eventually, I do want them to self-custody, although they may not get there in their lifetime or whatever, but at least push them in that direction.
Yeah, so we're trying to find something in between, something like, you know, an Unchained where you basically want to play Unchained, where you're Unchained and they're, you know, where there's like a backdrop, there's help, you're collaborating with them in some way.
Something like that. Obviously, I'm not giving out loans or anything, although I suppose we could
just
have
mean on
that.
the custody side.
There's I don't know if it would necessarily be collaborative custody like Unchained's model. I think you know, to some degree I don't know if I can trust them with a seed phrase that they can keep and, you know, not forget and stuff like that, especially because for a lot of my friends and relatives, you know, they might like Bitcoin because it's done so well, but I mean, they're not in the Bitcoin communities. They're not like, you know, like watching BTC sessions videos and going through like that. That's not. But they're still. I still don't want them to keep it on Coinbase, and I'm not sure they're ready for like their. I know that they're not ready for their own cold.
Okay, this is great. So let's talk about what we're getting to what you want to accomplish with this now. So let's talk about like sort of the dream state, you know, at Amazon, I forget the CTO's name. I think he was the original CTO of Amazon. He famously would like to write the blog post before he would even start working on a project. It's like, I'm going to write the marketing material, right? Of like, so what does a blog post has? It has like the key features. It's not every detail of how everything works, but it's like, what's the value proposition? So I want to ask you some questions about what this thing accomplishes. So like, you're pretty sure you don't want them handling seed phrases and things like that. However, you don't want them in a fully custodial, you know, situation with a trusted third party that's some corporation in the United States, right?
Yes.
Do you know, when I think about what you want to accomplish with this is like, do you want them to have the ability to spend their Bitcoin or come out of it into like to direct you in some way? Or is it really just like you're the Fort Knox for them and there's no way in, there's no way out?
I would say it'd be more, and you know, I called it like a Bitcoin bank for a reason, right? Like that, I want them to be able to withdraw, you know, small amounts, right? Get used to it, and maybe if they're making a big purchase, right? Like they're able to withdraw, and like send it to an exchange so they can convert it to dollars and then like whatever. But you know,
they have some discretion over.
They have. I mean, it's honestly their money, right? I want them to have that. I'm just sort of like the security provider for their money. I mean, it's I suppose somewhat possible that they can still get scammed and so on. But
Of course, yeah.
but like I want this particular attack vector, which is somebody else custodying and then like them running away with the money or having insolvency, which happens on a regular basis. I want to protect them from that, but I also want to protect them from like forgetting how to do everything and they lost their seed phrase. Now all their Bitcoin is gone, right? Those are sort of like the two extremes, the two things that I want to prevent. And by having some sort of bank and, I suspect that if they lived in El Salvador or something, and they could withdraw some, or they were visiting El Salvador, they could withdraw some on Lightning and go and pay a rent.
So we just hit another thing, right? So one of the necessary sort of, I would say strategy, typically has things like vision, some sort of business case. If you want this to be a business, it could just be a family thing that you do. But it also, I call them like necessary requirements. It's not a spec, but there are some certain things that are, so I would say like a necessary requirement you just said, it sounds like it needs to be a mobile app.
Yeah. Well,
or at least accessible on mobile.
I suppose they need to be able to do it like on the fly, right? Like,
on the fly. So at the very least, a web app that is accessible. On mobile.
I suppose they could call me. I don't intend to have like more than like 10 people on something like this, right? But
you're still a young man, Jimmy. You can have more kids.
And who knows? Maybe my community grows like really big, and they all want to bank with me or something. But these are people that already have relationships with me, but they're not necessarily into Bitcoin. So I do want them to like get into the Bitcoin community a little more as a result of this, and that's part of the goal. So yeah, I do want it might not be an app that they necessarily have on their phone, but if they have a Lightning app, then there's some way to withdraw to the Lightning wallet on their phone. Some reasonable amount.
Or if they call you, you could be their banker. They call and they say like, wire this. Send this.
Send the money to my exchange so I can go get cash for it.
Okay. So we're not sure if it's an app or not, but at the very least, like there's some sort of communication where they're coming, where you are the custodian of sorts, and they follow a process to access their money. And I'm sure the same applies to like they want to see how much money they have.
Sort
of thing. Okay,
and that's a big one, right? Like especially with like relatives, they're like, "How much do I have again?"
Bitcoin's 100,000. What?
Okay, Can you? There? So I'm sure that'd be like I haven't thought from their perspective as much, but that would be probably one of the.
So that's good enough for now on that part. The next question I would have for you on like sort of the necessary requirement side is basically how close or how far from the actual Bitcoin blockchain are you willing to allow them to get? You mentioned Lightning, which is not on chain. What about Fediments? Things like that. Like, there's a whole, we don't have to pick something, but like just describing how comfortable you are with abstracting them from the Bitcoin blockchain. Would you be comfortable with?
I would be comfortable with it as long as there's like real utility in it. So if you go out like 3 steps, right, like layer 3 or something like that, and they're able to do everything that they want to do with that money, then that's fine. The big thing is you want to protect them, and you want security, and you want to reduce their attack surface on at least the 2 big things, not self-custody and custody by Coinbase, like that.
I think a couple more things that I'm thinking about here, and we'll develop the strategy at the end of this. We're just sort of feeling out our world here. Is you mentioned security a lot, but part of the security for any type of scheme like this would be the bust factor on you. Right. As like the human being that they're either calling on the phone, you're their banker. In a sense, either literally or figuratively in some way, is how important is that to you?
Oh, very important. Because if I do die, then like and this is all sort of like the tricky part of it, and I'm not sure.
We don't have to know exactly how it works, but like you're just saying that like
it needs to be backed up in such a way that they could recover it in some reasonable fashion if I die. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, I had one more, and I'm trying to remember what my question for you was on this. Oh, yeah. A very important last question is, do you, the big banker in this scenario, intend to be compensated in any way? Do you want to run this as a service? Maybe it's not you, or do you want this to be replicatable so that other people can take the role of you and their families, and they are paying you for that? Like, do you want this to be a business or not?
I think the ideal would be that other sort of like Bitcoiners that have relatives that they're trying to convince and so on, can take something like this and set it up and maybe make it a lot easier for a lot of people that are extremely intimidated by all the stuff and be able to do it. Now, do I want to get compensated for that? In some way, ideally. And I don't know if it's, with a software license or with consulting or whatever, but it's something. Yeah.
Okay. So MVP is your family, but there, as we build this, we have to keep an eye on the fact that like, this might be useful for other people.
Right. Right. And I should hope so. Like that would be the vision of it, is that instead of, each self-sovereign person, right? Like that's sort of the model that we have, but you can have slightly larger self-sovereign groups, right? Where, as long as you have some sort of trust relationship that, you can sort of have a lot of the best of both worlds kind of situation. People complain about, well, grandma can't use Bitcoin. Well, ideally with something like this, they could, right? At least have some sort of account. And it's like, well, grandma has a bank account, so she should be able to sort of bank with you. I guess I'm maybe like a slogan for this is like, with Bitcoin, you can be your own bank. You can also be a bank for your family. Sure. Right? Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I do have a couple more annoying questions.
Okay.
Actually.
Keep going.
Okay. So, oh man, gosh, there's so much to get into. Again, like focusing on like the strategic sort of imperative here is, so it might be a business. We're not really sure yet if it's a business or not, but being compensated for it or making it useful for other people would be good. Can we think of any comparable? Like I always say, like, is there any analogy in the fiat world and the Bitcoin world that's like close to this, where you could just say, because the reason I asked that in the strategy, it's really nice sometimes to be able to point to something and say like, hey, you know how that works? Yeah. We're kind of like that, except these things, you know? And then that gives people a starting point of familiarity where, not that, those analogies in Silicon Valley sometimes, we're Uber, but for cats, are necessarily super helpful, but they can actually be helpful.
Yeah, the closest one I can think of is some sort of a bank, right? But it's at a smaller scale, and it doesn't require regulation, and it's based on trust relationships.
Yeah, we're gonna throw out regulation and compliance at this point because I have no idea. I mean, like we could end up in 4 episodes being money transmitters and having a big problem on our hands. But let's just put that aside for now.
Like
it's too big.
And I don't know. Maybe it's forced to be limited to your immediate family or underage children or something. But like, I'm fine with that.
Or maybe you're just gonna have to legally adopt every customer that you get. And then okay, I think we have enough there, right, to start forming like a real strategy.
Sure. Okay.
Right? And so, in my mind, like we'd be writing this out and like running certain things by us, but like let's just start at the big stuff, right? We want your close people that are close to you, right, in your say immediate family and extended family to get access to Bitcoin, where you are the most trusted party in their setup.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know how that's going to work, but that's the goal.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. So Jimmy, you are the bank, right? And our best analogy in this is that like everyone should feel at the end of this that basically Jimmy's kind of my banker, right? I own the Bitcoin. It's my money. I can see it. I can do stuff with it and everything, but I'm putting my trust in Jimmy, and Jimmy's going to, be there for me to help me through this confusing transition from fiat to the Bitcoin world.
And back. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So normally I would try to find, some sort of memorable hook on this. On the spot, I might not be able to do it, but something along the line of, Jimmy the banker here is my idea that like, we're going to turn you into a banker, right?
Yeah.
And
be your own banker.
Yeah.
I don't know, something like that.
I think it's worth pointing out in the strategy as well. So we have sort of like, who are the customers, right? In that statement, it's your family, immediate family, kind of extended family group, and your role in this as the banker, right? So who are the customers? Who's ultimately responsible for their happiness with the product, right? And then I would say that like I would normally try to say, well, what does success look like here? Success here looks like your whole family is able to hold Bitcoin securely over an extended period of time.
Without necessarily any technical knowledge or...
Okay, that's a big one too. I forgot about that, right? Is we'll call this the XPub rule, right? And it's fun to put jokes into a strategy and make people laugh. It's like, if you have to say the word XPub to your family, then the product has failed.
Or any really like Bitcoin jargon, really. Because you're assuming these people are passively familiar with Bitcoin, but not like at the level that we are, obviously.
Side note, you probably failed at your dinner conversations in this case, but yeah, I'll let you slide on that. Okay, that's good. And on some of the necessary requirements, we want them to be able to access things from on the go, from a mobile phone, which at the very least necessitates mobile web connectivity, or that they can call you and you can affect what they need to existing infrastructure out there, Lightning wallets, Bitcoin wallets, exchange accounts, things like that. Okay, that's pretty good. Okay. Sorry. Last point is fault tolerance is actually hugely important here. If this is sort of Jimmy as a service, Jimmy as a banker, right? Is that if Jimmy goes away, something needs to happen to where they can recover these funds.
Yeah, or
where
even more ideally, it falls to somebody else that's maybe next technical competent person in the family, and they can run the whole thing and nothing really changes. So like that would be even more
sure.
ideal,
There could be some sort of I don't even know the word for this. Like,
succession plan.
Yeah, some sort of succession plan or executor of the account that knows what to do when the banker, as it were, disappears or is incapacitated for whatever reason. Okay, so I would roughly structure a strategy like this. You have a vision for it. You know who your customers are. What you want their end state to be, right? You have a few constraints that you're putting on top of it. It's Bitcoin. They have to be able to access it in certain ways. And then you also have some things that you're willing, at a high level, at the most abstract level to accept. Like, well, they don't have to be interacting with the Bitcoin blockchain necessarily, right? We have to make those layers of abstraction, make sense to them as they're, trying to get dollars or trying to spend it or something like that. But we're not constrained to like on-chain only. If it was on-chain only, we'd want to put that in the strategy. That's a big thing that's going to constrain future decisions. And actually, I want to make that point is like one of the points of the strategy is not just to be hopeful about everything you can do. It's also that like, with that idea, and this is kind of a balancing act that you just have to kind of figure out by going through a thoughtful strategy phase multiple times, is like you do end up wanting to constrain it, because if we didn't say the word Bitcoin in the strategy, right, and we did this for Solana, then you or your customers would be really upset at the end of the day, right? There's no perfect, alchemy here on what is too low level, right? Other than I like to say, focus on what things accomplish, focus on, who this serves, focus on whether, what type of company or product you're trying to build. Is this for profit, non-profit? That layer of stuff is good for a strategy document. So at this point, typically what I would do is I would just start writing these things down in order, and I'd create an artifact. And that artifact is really important. And we'll actually, I think after the fact, we'll make a little artifact and we'll put it up so we can document our process here. In this case, I think, 1.5, 2 pages somewhere in there is sufficient, right? But the whole reason that artifact exists is for several reasons, right? First is, as we get further down the process and start dealing with lower levels of abstraction, everything we write in terms of a spec, or we're doing a design, or we're trying to make a decision, if we can't point back to the strategy and say, what we're doing here is in service of this thing we wanted to do, this vision we had, or this customer we identified, or this necessary requirement that we had, or this business case that we were trying to make, if we can't, then we have to stop for a second and say, like, well, there's two things that we can do. We can either not do it because it's not in service of what our strategy states, or we can change the strategy, right? And for a lot of people that heard me talking about, the phases of product development or the atomic units, and therefore the invariants, they might think, well, that sounds kind of waterfalling. And I put in my articles, I'm like, well, no, we can be salmon. We can swim upstream if we need to. If we're in discovery later, which we'll do later, and we're trying to write out a spec and do designs, and we find out that something's wrong with the strategy, then we stop what we're doing and we go back and we update the strategy. And we update that artifact. That strategy, that's our North Star, right? And those constraints that we put in things, right, in that sort of art more than science that you're trying to do, is just to make sure that you don't get too far off base, right? So yeah, it's Bitcoin, you know who your customer is, things like that. My question to you at this point would be, like, can you envision, like, as a software developer, because software developers, not just PMs, input into strategy, right? Can you imagine us going off and trying to write a spec now, and later when you're getting into code, looking back at what we've defined in our strategy so far and thinking, like, oh shit, we should have thought of that?
Yeah,
because it's a good thing to think of.
So you're asking for things that, like, my future self would regret. Or
the future self would regret, or things that you wanted to get across to me. I mean, I asked you a bunch of questions here, but, like, we're working on this together. I might have to write down the actual words on a page for the strategy doc because I'm the product manager. And that's my job, right? But it doesn't mean that you don't get to tell me what to do here.
Yeah. I'm sure there will be, but I can't think of any right now. So the point that you made about, like, later on, you might be working on very different things, but that you have this sort of North Star where you know where you're going. Very important point for me, because I think for a lot of people that do start businesses or try doing something new, they get kind of overwhelmed by the tyranny of the urgent, right? Like, I need to go do this because it's due tomorrow, and they don't necessarily think about whether or not that is the right thing to be doing. Rather,
engineers get screwed by this more than anyone, right? They're very expensive, so they're made to be busy, right? If an engineer isn't doing anything, then you're losing so much money. They got to be busy doing something. Why, right? And I make the argument, it's like, sometimes an engineer might be paying down tech debt, right? It's like, well, do you need a strategy for that? And it's like, of course you do, right? We don't just pay down tech debt. We don't just fiddle with the code. Why? Is the code insufficient in some way? Are we having a lot of failure cases or a lot of bug reports coming through? Did something change about the app? Is there something we want to do in the future that we need to refactor? Everything we do when we're writing software is in service of some strategic imperative. Right?
It's not just software. It's whatever business thing.
And a lot of this would apply to to building cars or anything like that. In fact, we get a lot of what we get in Scrum and things like that, and methodologies in software development from, forgot his name, at Toyota. I'll remember it. Wrote a famous book that a lot of the software development stuff comes from. Anyway, the point is that we're always in service of some strategy, and if you don't write it down and you don't have some sort of artifact for this, it's just lazy. That means you have lazy executives, you have lazy product managers, you have people that, like, are really unwilling to take on the responsibility of having an idea, and putting their name on it and signing a team up to go build something, right? When I hear about these flat organizations and these organizations that don't have titles and everything, it's like, yeah, maybe, especially if it's 4 guys on a startup team or something like that. I get it. some of these things can feel bureaucratic and stuff like that, but it's like, part of me thinks that it's an avoidance of responsibility, right? Because if a strategy fails, you're in big trouble, right? If your code fails at some point, that's relatively easier to fix, right? And what you want to do is, and if your strategy fails while you're writing code, it's more expensive to go back and change the strategy. Every time you get further down those layers of abstraction, right? If we ship the code and a customer finds the problem, that's more expensive than if we had found it in QA, which is more expensive than if we had found it while we were coding, which is more expensive if we had specified it better, which is more expensive than if we had just gotten the strategy right in the first place, right? So it's really important we get these things right. And when I hear about people saying like, oh, well, we're a really flat organization, no one tells anyone what to do. It's just like, well, then, you have executives or CEO that's a coward and just won't put their name on something and say, this is what we're doing. I believe in this. I have a vision for this. I know what it's supposed to look like. Like, let's go execute and do it. I hate that. I hate it. It pops up in a lot of weird places.
It feels very political, to be honest. Like the like unwillingness to like put your name on something or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's kind of cowardice in a way, which is just like we'll figure it out in the code is just like it's lazy and it goes back to that idea that thing I said about ideas are cheap. It's like, well, no, they really fucking matter. Sorry, they really matter. They really, really matter. The idea matters. The strategy matters. The vision matters. And the people that are unwilling to put their names on that and just say like, oh, we just sort of figure it out as we go, I think are avoiding a lot. And people that chalk that up to like, oh, well, that's too bureaucratic or that's too waterfally. It's like, no, writing a 2-page strategy doc is not too bureaucratic, right? If you're really good at writing these docs have lifespans of 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, where they can really guide further development for a long time. And they don't have to be big 50-page manifestos or anything like that. It's just someone has to think something that matters, that inspires someone. And, when we write this strategy, like writing a strategy document, like it needs to be memorable. If it's 50 pages, you're getting into spec world, right? You're getting into too many details, too low levels of abstraction, right? If someone can't remember, if you write a strategy and there are 3 things that matter, people can remember 3 things that matter, right? I remember, I'll give an example. I'll give a Unchained example and a Zapwrite example. In Unchained, this was not the corporate strategy, but we did make this strategy of like, we're going to let people buy Bitcoin through Unchained. Until that point, you could not buy Bitcoin at Unchained. And so it was like, well, how are we going to do it? There's a lot of ways to buy Bitcoin. And I remember there was one line in particular that if I could get everyone to remember one sentence, right? And it's a mouthful, that we would build ultimately the right product, which was buy Bitcoin directly to cold storage with keys that you control. That was the necessary requirement. That was it. It was a 1-page doc, right? And I had that bolded and it became an incantation for everyone in the company. Everyone in the company could say, in the future at Unchained, customers will be able to buy Bitcoin directly to cold storage with keys that they control. Now, there's a lot of ways to implement that, right? And a lot of decisions on third parties and, and all these things. But you could remember that one line. And that's really all I needed to get across. Something like Zapwrite, it would be, connect any wallet, right, to accept Bitcoin. Oh my gosh, it's one sentence again, right? Connect any wallet to accept Bitcoin. All right, any wallet anywhere. Okay, I if I'm going through it and then writing specs later on, and I'm working on some mumbo jumbo over here, and it's not in service of connecting any wallet to accept Bitcoin, I'm probably not working on something important, right? And with yours, we're gonna do the same thing, right? Which is basically empower Jimmy's family to custody Bitcoin through Jimmy.
Okay, all right.
That's it.
Well, so the interesting part for me here is that this entire artifact that you're generating, it's almost like an agreement among all the stakeholders. Like, and that's sort of like the purpose of that, because you not only want to keep everybody on the same page, but you also want to keep future versions of everybody on that same page and like committed to doing the same thing rather than sort of slowly changing away and drifting into some other territory, which I think happens with a lot of businesses, a lot of companies, and so on.
I'm really glad you brought. I addressed this in the article, Think Then Do, which is I consider a good strategy document to end up post compromise, meaning there are no more compromises to be made, right? So what does that mean? And I'll just talk my book a little bit here, which is like. I compare, I lived in New York City in 2010, right? And they had this whole campaign that was get on the subway and pay with your credit card. Pay with your credit card, get on the subway, which was like kind of true. It wasn't really true. You had to go to the subway, and then there was a machine in the subway where you go up and you use your credit card. You buy a Metro card, and that Metro card would end up having like 40 cents on it, which wouldn't even get you a ride. So I wasn't really using my credit card. I was buying a Metro card with my credit card, then using that Metro card. And then I went to London like 2 years later, and they said, use your credit card to get on the subway. And I just sort of picked up my credit card and waved it at a thing, and I was in the subway. It was like, oh, okay. That's what I mean by post-compromise. They both probably had the same strategy document, right? Use your credit card to get on the subway, right? However, the necessary requirements were probably a little bit different in that because, in New York, I could argue I'm not using my credit card to get on the subway. I don't think so. And how do I know that's true? Because London exists, and I just did it, right? And so London, right? London had a strategy that was post-compromise. No, you have to literally use your credit card to get access to the subway. In New York, their strategy allowed a lot of things to come in later, so their strategy was not post-compromise, right? So a good strategy document means that you avoid New York and you get London.
Yeah, and that sort of organizational unity around the artifact and all the stuff that's written in it, I think is very, very important, because if you get people, and especially if you're not working alone, you have multiple people, and they all have slightly different visions, that ends up actually
it's a disaster.
It destroys companies, right? It absolutely makes it a horrible
there might be
place
10
to work.
people who contribute to this artifact. Even in our world, right? We're going to go talk to Marty outside or Parker or whoever out there, and we're going to talk to them about this idea, and they're going to have inputs. Ultimately, your name is going to be on the strategy. You're the one doing this, right? And in an organization, it should be the same way. Is like someone's name is on this thing, even if there's 10 inputs, even if there's 50 inputs into there, which is the sort of accountability side of it, right? Because when strategy fails, it's a disaster. When things later on fail, it's not necessarily so bad. We can fix those things cheaper.
Right. And if you have the right strategy, you're providing value to the market, and that's ultimately
that's why ideas are not cheap.
Right.
Because getting the right strategy is hard. It's very hard, right? A lot of people fail in the marketplace. The marketplace is the only thing that ultimately matters. And so the wrong strategy and failing in the marketplace is a disaster for everyone. Ideas aren't cheap. They're actually very, very important.
And getting the right idea is cheap.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's what this part of the process, I think, has been, is not just have the idea, but think through what it means and how you can get agreement so that you can execute, or at least begin to walk down to the next invariant and so on. But first you need a clear vision of where you want to end up. And that's what this part of the session is for.
And one of the last things I would say on this is that, like, you could spend months setting a strategy. You could do it in 20 minutes the way we just did, and then write it down.
What would take months? Like, is it research, or what? It
could be research, right? Especially if you're inventing something new, right?
Okay.
Inventing something new that requires like technology that doesn't exist, right?
Okay.
You might want to labor on that strategy a little bit longer to find out how viable creating that new technology might be, right? But I would say that, like, I also have a little saying, when I would hire product managers, I might have said this before on your show, but like I would always say domain expertise is the most overrated thing. Give me a great product manager that can build Excel, and then I can help them make great Bitcoin products,
Right.
or someone that built a job board can build this, over here. I would say that domain expertise is actually more important the higher levels of abstraction you are, and less important the lower levels of abstraction. When you're setting strategy, if you don't know your domain very well, because you're taking a lot of leaps of faith here, you have to have intuition about the marketplace that you're going into, or else you're going to be bad at setting strategy. If you're writing a spec, you're lower down. It's like, well, at least you have the strategy. You have the domain expertise.
Well, there's some guidance
guiding you,
because you have the North Star already.
If you're writing code and you're a great programmer, does it matter that you're building on Bitcoin or that you're building at JP Morgan? It's like, not really. Domain expertise can help you, but it gets more overrated the lower down the lower, or I guess,
further
lower
you
levels
go,
of abstractions away. You get away from that. But at strategy, where we are right now, it's very important. It's it's the most important part. Is that because we might be, if we were two people that had never worked in Bitcoin, we might describe something that is literally impossible to do, right? Or very ill-advised to do, right?
Or has been done already.
Or has been done a million times already, or has failed a million times already.
So that would take a lot of time, obviously.
That would take a lot of time.
Yeah.
Now, I do need to like couch that a little bit, is that like there is also a benefit to a bit of naivety when you're setting strategy, right? A lot of founders know this, who are starting businesses for the first time, is that if you're starting Airbnb, right, it's probably a good idea to be naive about the hotel industry. If you know everything about the hotel industry, you're very unlikely to even try to build Airbnb. So
too many assumptions baked in, and your North Star is not going to point at the right place.
So like, again, I'm talking both sides of the book here a little bit, but domain expertise is most valuable at strategy phase, but maintaining that ability to say like, we're not going to constrain ourselves too much.
Because in the end, like, domain expertise is not the be all end all.
No,
because ultimately what you want to do is provide value to the market, and that may not necessarily come through domain expertise. In fact, that like you're stuck in the old ways of doing things, and oftentimes what a new company needs to do is a new way.
Yeah, and I guess what I'm trying to get at there is that like if you're going to build a power plant and you don't understand the basics of thermodynamics, maybe you need that level of domain expertise, right? I'm not saying you have to have, when I started working on, I'd never worked on Bitcoin before, ever. I've been interested in Bitcoin for a long time, but my domain expertise ended at my own personal experiences using Bitcoin, right? And storing value in Bitcoin. When I went to work at On-Chain, I'd never actually ever built anything on Bitcoin. When I went to Zapperite, I'd done it exactly once, which is usually the definition of an expert, right?
You've just done it once.
Yeah. So, is someone has done it more than you as an expert, and usually that means once.
Yeah. That's definitely enough. Okay, so can you describe for us like what that strategy document is going to look like? I mean, you put in some of it. There's memorable phrases in there.
Yeah.
What are we going to put in there? And maybe we'll record to show what we came up with.
We'll come up with it after this. But essentially, we're going to have a little strategy doc, nice title that says, we're building the Jimmy Bank, right? And we'll give it a name to be TBD, right? We're going to explain, basically what problem we're trying to solve, right? At a high level, right? About your family, you wanting your family to have exposure and access to Bitcoin without having to deal with
custodians,
custodians and stuff like that. We're going to describe your customers in the sense that like this is focused on your family and immediate or extended family there. We're going to add in the caveat that while the MVP here for this new venture is focused on your use case, we don't want to constrain ourselves as we architect this and build this out to where we don't think other people could, say, sublicense the product or that you could sell it into a marketplace of other people that have the same problem. Because that's important detail for when we're actually writing code and stuff like that. The other things that I would put in there, right, is that, we're focused on Bitcoin, necessary requirement things. We're focused on Bitcoin. We are not concerned with abstracting Bitcoin's blockchain, having them interact directly with the blockchain to the extent of Lightning and things like Fediment are on the table. It's not saying we're using those, but like those constraints don't exist. And trying to remember. And really, we'll define in more detail the overall experience that you're trying to accomplish for your family, right? That they need to be able to do this when they're away from you. They need a way to interact with you, whether that's through an app or even through a phone or something like that. In that you explicitly want this is their Bitcoin, right? And they get to decide what to do with it. You are just a safety net on top of that. We'll tease that out a little bit into, again, not too much detail, but like into a necessary requirement of like how you want to be involved in their interaction with their Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
It's about a page. It's not that crazy,
right?
But it gives us enough to say, because what are we doing next, right? And I'll give a little preview of that is after we write that strategy doc, and we'll probably have some things when we come back for the next episode that we decided to change, and we'll start out with that. But what we'll be trying to accomplish in the next is really the hardest part, is taking that strategy and starting to get into the nitty gritty about okay, is this a mobile app? Is this a web app? Is this,
what is it exactly?
What is it? Is it a Telegram thing that I'm sending? We're going to try to design some things, but these are words and pixels, not lines of code. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I hoping that maybe the people that are watching can kind of visualize what that would look like. But are you literally just going to have a piece of paper and we're going to talk and write stuff down?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
That's it.
All right, that's it.
I mean, everyone thinks these things are so fancy. It's like you had an idea, we fleshed it out a little bit, right? And we're going to put those words on a page, and that's going to be a constitution between you and me on how we're going to proceed through the invariance of software development, and hopefully it's going to increase the odds that we're successful at the end.
Okay. Well, hopefully that's useful to the people that are watching. We'll be moving with this and trying this. I really have no idea how far we're gonna go down this, and
I mean it's really up to you, Jimmy, because it's an ambitious project.
Yeah,
you're gonna have to build it because I'm not a programmer.
Yeah, and it's something that I want to exist, but. I think having somebody like you that kind of knows this process is helpful, and hopefully it can inspire people that are watching that are interested in doing a business or of some kind, and expanding the Bitcoin ecosystem in some way. Then that they can take some of I guess the conversation that we've had, some of the stuff that you've written, and maybe have a better idea of what that looks like in reality. So, yeah. Well,
my hope for your audience is that a lot of people think of this stuff as, kind of magic, the software development world. And to a certain extent, I mean, there are hard skills to pick up, right? Programming is a hard skill, meaning you just have to learn how to program. The non-programming part of it, right, is writing words on a page and being persuasive, right, and learning your industry and talking to customers and stuff like that. But like when you ask, is that it? Is it just? It's like, yeah, that's what you do. You write a doc, and that becomes the thing that you do. There's nothing else to it. Okay. It's not that crazy.
Okay. Well, we're gonna go and write this document. Maybe we'll like display it somehow on at the end of the video. I don't know, do something with it, but this end of part one, right? This is invariant.
This is
one,
where
right?
everything starts, right?
Okay, invariant one, think then do. Yeah. All right. So we're gonna start doing because we've done a lot of thinking. So yeah, there you go.
Not enough.